if you enjoy today's lecture so much, you just can't get enough of it. You can watch it in a little bit. Any questions? Awesome. Okay, well, let's see. We left off, last time I saw you anyway, we left off talking about divorce. We just kind of got the ball rolling there, but just to make sure we're all in the same place and we're all thinking about the same things and we're all writing down the same notes. Let's see, what can I ask you? Who usually files first? The women do. And how long have they been waiting? A while, right? It's about 2. I think I told you guys the story of the first people in my family where she applied to nursing school, and yep, sure enough. So we know in divorce, it usually happens within the first 8 years or so. The woman typically files first. She's usually been planning this. And then what's the number one reason women say they got divorced? Communication issues, right? They just couldn't, they tried to crack this for a long time. And the men, of course, what's our excuse? We don't know. And remember, these are just the top answers. So there's other reasons too. Those are the ones that just bubble to the top. Well, divorce. There's more than 4 that I thought for this class. Again, you find yourself being a family therapist. What are you dealing with? There's 4 what we call major stations of divorce. In other words, when a couple goes through a divorce, there's some things that they're probably thinking of logically, but there's other things that they may not have thought of, may not have planned. I think I mentioned it to you guys. It could have been the Thursday section. It could have been both of you. But one of my favorite clients ever back at Ohio State when I was just training to be an MFT was a family that called and they were going to get a divorce. This couple, they had 2 kids, and I've never had a call like this before. Do you remember what they told me? Was it you guys? You're shaking your head, yes. What did they want? What was their therapy? They wanted to get a divorce correctly. How fantastic is that? I've never had a call like that since. I probably never will again. But what you're about to learn is exactly the things that we talked about, at least in our first few sessions. The first one, thankfully they had figured out, is what we call the legal station of divorce. This is what most people think of when they think of divorce. Let me back up for a second. How do you get married? Like, how do you really get married? Does anyone know? Yeah. You go to the courthouse. So a lot of people don't think of this, and I'm not sure why. But having a ceremony with a pastor, I mean, that's nice. It's fine. Or on a beach or with your best friend or whoever it is, wherever you get married at, the ceremony, in terms of actually being married, that's meaningless. I mean, it's a nice show and it's a nice ceremony, but there's no value to that. You can get married without doing any of that stuff. Marriage is a legal process. You go to the courthouse. I believe in Ohio, the fee is now $65. You pay a $65 fee. You stand in front of a person, they rubber stamp it, and there you go. Congratulations, you're married. And from the state of Ohio says you're married. Just like that, divorce is also a legal ceremony. A little bit more unceremonious, though, than the actual wedding ceremony. But the legal station, of course, this is where lawyers get involved, right? The legal station is what causes a lot of the arguments, a lot of the bickering between the couples. But this is going to be a quick one. What a lot of people don't know is this is absolutely unnecessary. You do not need lawyers to get a divorce. Most people do because they don't know there's another option. What is the other option called? Does anyone know? Because this is what I was doing with this family, actually, without even knowing it. And some MFTs make a career out of this, actually. You're wondering, what can I do with my MFT degree? It's called divorce mediation. So another option to sidestep the legal avenue is what's called divorce mediation. Now, there are papers to get filed in a courthouse. That is true. To get a divorce, that's also a legal process. But the mediator will do that for you. So divorce mediation is typically for couples who aren't necessarily ready to kill each other, right? There probably hasn't been some really tragic thing where they're constantly arguing. They just want to split up, make it sacrimonious, like you get this, I get this. And that's what a divorce mediation process is. You talk through and work through the arrangements, what's going to happen. Or you can choose the other route, which is the legal route, which is where lawyers get involved. And you don't need to write all this down. I'm just getting this out. Make sure you understand this. What is a lawyer's job? A divorce lawyer. Like really, at the end of the day, the divorce lawyer has one simple goal. And by the way, it has nothing to do with the feelings or the emotions of the other partner. Yeah. Absolutely. The divorce lawyer's goal is to get as much for their client as they possibly can. So right from the get-go, you have two teams, right, fighting with each other. And this is what makes divorce so ugly sometimes, is two people who maybe 6 weeks ago knew they wanted to split up, they're not happy, but at least it wasn't this bad. Then the lawyers get involved, and it's even worse, because now you have literally Team A and Team B pitted against each other, trying to suck the soul out of each other. And then we throw kids in, and it gets even more fun. But more on that later. So the legal aspect of divorce mediation is an option. The social station of divorce. Of all the stations, this is probably the one that couples and young adults are oblivious to until they actually go through it. By the way, and I'll probably tell parts of my own story. How many of you have been impacted by divorce in some way? I had two older sisters. I was 7 when my parents got divorced. And then I had the step family with stepsisters. So I've got the whole shebang. I've got walking statistic. Just wait till the next couple slides. My family literally did everything. I think they bought a book and looked at, oh yeah, let's do this. Because that's exactly what they did. And what do we mean by this? I actually watched my parents, I was young, but talking to them, they absolutely went through this. And they certainly didn't expect it. Any ideas what this means? Yes, you have an idea.
Is it like their friends just kind of take sides with one or the other?
You're close. You're getting there. It absolutely has something to do with friends. Well, before we get to the divorce, let me tell you what your future is going to look like. What you love. First of all, you're going to marry someone just like yourself. Let's say you do end up getting married. How many of you have friends? There's 2 of you. I'm really worried. Oh, why? So a couple of you have no friends, but so let's say you do. So you have friends. That's fantastic. When you get married, this isn't going to happen to all your friends, but when you do get married, you're not going to see some of those friends anymore. You're just not. I mean, you're going to talk on Facebook or whatever is existing in 5 or 6 years whenever you do get married. But it's who you're going to hang out with. Well, the person you're married to, but who else? I mean, it's not like you close yourselves off. Then we're really worried about you. You're going to hang out with other married couples. It's an amazing little process that we see happen to nearly every single person. Now, if your friends get married and live close to you, great, because then you'll still continue to hang out. Then when you have kids, guess what happens? Guess who you hang out with? You hang out with other parents with other kids who like your kids, and that's how you meet. This is how this all progresses. You have friends that are single. When you get married, you have friends that are married. And when you have kids, you end up having friends that are married that also have kids. So what happens when you get a divorce? Actually, what we typically see, so this is what I want you to write down. The social divorce is the loss of connection of a peer network, and also many times one's status in the community. So there's 2 aspects to this. You lose friends. Essentially what we're saying is you lose friends, and oftentimes your place in the community. I don't mean you're getting fired from jobs and things like that. But when people get divorced, oftentimes they disengage from roles that they had because they've lost their friends. Your friends and your role in the community are typically intimately connected. Let me give you just a generic example. I don't know why this is pop. I'm trying to think of something you can relate to because a lot of you are like, what the hell does it mean? So let's say you go to church, you're an usher, right? So you do something in the church, you're active in that role. Well, a lot of your friends are there. A lot of people, when they go through a divorce, might stop going to that church. And they stop doing that role because they didn't see it, but it was intimately connected to those friends that they had. Because what you mentioned is, the last thing to write down is most friends actually choose not to take sides. They actually step back. and they say, I'm not going to take sides. So they disengage. So there's like this withdrawal from friends. So socially, you might find yourself on an island. And again, does this happen to everyone? Absolutely not. But it happens a lot, and we call this the social divorce. Long-winded way of saying you typically lose your married friends that you had building up, because now you're single again. Now you're looking for all your single friends again, because now the married people are hanging out with you, because now you're one of the single ones that they're not going to talk to. And now you're really in a pickle because you might have kids. Now you're in that club of the single people with kids. The psychological divorce. What we mean by this is the mental impact from a mental health standpoint. The impact that divorce has. We'll talk about the parents for now. We'll get to the kids. Obviously, you see that fourth station up there. Coffee break. All right. Did you hear about the new recommendation to wear 2 masks? Doesn't that sound fun? No, it doesn't sound fun. I don't know why I brought it. You're like, what? Yeah, they just talked like it was all over the news, and now maybe we'll recommend 2 masks. I don't know. I don't know if I could talk after that. We'll see. We'll see how things go. I'm just going to wear a respirator, I think, for the next 3 months before I get vaccinated. The psychological impact of divorce. Quick question. Let's say we have a stereotypical heterosexual marriage. You got a guy, you got a woman. Let's just pretend there's no kids, just to make it easy. They get a divorce. Let's go out 5, 6 years, and let's say neither person has gotten remarried, so they're still single. Psychologically, who am I more worried about as a therapist? The husband or the wife? In other words, who's damaged more, typically? Yeah, the husband. Some people this surprises, I don't know why, but the husband, and here's why. So the psychological impact of divorce is typically much harder on the male, unless he gets divorced. I'm planting a seed for something, or unless he gets remarried. So if the man remains single, psychologically, that man is much greater risk of depression, anxiety, substance abuse, all the terrible mental illnesses that can creep in when someone goes through a significant stress or trauma that they don't cope with. But we have a very logical explanation for this. If I take, and we've done this in studies, so just think of married people that you know. Maybe think of dads, grandpas, whoever it is that you know. If we talk to married wives and we ask them a simple question, we're going to get a bunch of wives in one room, a bunch of husbands in another room. We're going to ask the wives a very simple question. Write down, just really quickly, write down all of the names of the people that you would go to if you were going through something very difficult and you needed someone to talk to. Very simple question, right? So the wives, we give them 60 seconds. They start jotting down names. How many do you think they write down? Like, what's the average length of that list? It's usually about 8 to 10 people. So they get, right, that sounds good. And the good news is the husband is almost always first. That's awesome. That's a really good sign of a healthy relationship. But when we ask the husbands, how many people do you think appear on that list? You're exactly right. Just one. Only one. We give the guy 60 seconds to think about all the people you would turn to, and guess who it is? His wife, which sounds fantastic. In other words, what happens typically, again, do we have anecdotal evidence to say the contrary? Of course, but typically, when a couple gets divorced, a husband loses his entire emotional support system. I understand it's kind of cliche and stereotypical, right? The guy doesn't talk to anybody else. But it turns out in reality that's actually true. The guy really doesn't talk to anybody else, at least on an emotional level. Women have backups, typically. Did they lose their most important support system? Yes. But they have 7 or 8 backups just waiting to fill in the gaps. The husband typically, well, first of all, he's clueless. He doesn't even know what happened. I guess it helps if you would have planned this for 2 years like the woman. But the man is typically left with no emotional support system whatsoever, which it turns out is important when you're going through a significant stress and trauma. And even if you're happy to be out of this marriage, it's still a very stressful, traumatic situation to find yourself And that brings us finally to the fourth station of divorce, which we'll hover around a little bit. And that is the children's divorce. This is where we spent most of our time, the family that I worked with who wanted to go through a good divorce. This is definitely where we spent most of our time because naturally this is what they were the most worried about. They had heard something that unbelievable. 6th grade. Mrs. Huddle, 6th grade class. This memory is seared into my mind. I actually had a teacher. I don't remember the setup. It was something about, I didn't do like some kind of spelling thing, or whatever it was, some kind of homework that I didn't do. And she took me out into the hall and was talking to me about the importance of getting my work done and blah, blah, blah. And she literally told me to my face that because my parents were divorced, that I was damaged goods. I had a teacher in elementary school actually tell me that because now I'm like, what, 6th grade? How old are you in then? Like 10, 11, 12, somewhere around there. It's been a few years. But she actually told me that because my parents were divorced, no wonder I was like such a troublemaker. You're just damaged goods because your parents got divorced. I remember thinking like, I don't know. I don't know if that's true. I have adults around me saying things that don't really line up. But that was the idea that if you get a divorce, you're going to screw up your kids. Can that happen? Yeah, it absolutely can. The good news is most of the time it doesn't. So let's actually start with the good news. We're going to jump down to that 80%. Here is the wonderful news about children and divorce. 80% of the time, the kids turn out perfectly fine, pretty well adjusted as adults. So we're looking 10, 15 years down the road. So they're not suffering from depression or anxiety. So that is the very, very good news. About 80%. But lots of people get divorced. And that 20% that doesn't turn out so well, we're talking about millions of children in this country. So that's not insignificant. It's like, oh, well, 80, that's a beat. Well, no, we're still leaving millions of kids out there who are dealing with something extremely traumatic that's not their fault. So let's go back up to the top. Again, we're talking about a traditional, I know, stereotypical family system here. But what is our, and my family certainly followed this to a T, what's our traditional setup? So if you're a therapist and you know you have a family that's been through a divorce, and there's kids involved, and what I mean by setup is who's with who, and what's the arrangement? And it's amazing that in 2021, this is still what it's like. Yeah, I'm just gonna let you answer everything.
What about the mom most of the time and the dad on the weekend?
I think that's still the setup today. And that's exactly what my family did back in 1985. Oh my gosh. Yes, 1980. Back to the Future was on the big screen and Kevin's parents were getting a divorce. So the typical setup still today, at least in the state of Ohio, I can't speak for other states, but mom gets custody and dad gets to see the kids every other weekend. This is a legal custody arrangement set up, usually by the courts. Now, just because this is a setup, does that mean you have to follow that exactly? No. If the two parents get along, of course dad can hang out whenever he wants and take the kids, but this is what the dad is legally allowed. And of course, what happens a lot is that's all the wife allows him to have. So the dad gets entitled, so just think about that for a second. And I've seen it go both ways. I've seen many situations where the mother is just borderline neglectful, and the dad is a great dad, and still the court deems the mother more important. The kid goes with the mom. Just think about that for a second from the dad's point of view of what your reality is now like with your kids. You now have every other weekend. I used to do the math on this, but so you can do it on your own if you'd like. Just think of how many days out of the year that father gets to interact with their kids. It's next to nothing. So it's an incredible setup that we've developed with these kids. Now there's other options, split custody, all that, but that's still the most common one that we have. So I guess in this class, it can turn out fantastic, But I'm interested in, this is what we talked about with that family, is the mistakes. The mistakes that families and couples can make with their kids. This isn't a complete list, but it's probably the 3 most common ones that we see occur. And the first one we'll just call sabotage. Sometimes parents will send their kids, like little secret agents, over to the other person's house to try to blow it up. Get some dirt. I heard your dad is doing this. I heard your mom is doing this. So parents will literally use their children as like little spies, little James Bonds, being sent to find the thing. What's that credit card thing I saw? Who's he buying that for? Like literally. They will put their kids in these positions of trying to sabotage the other person's future. A second one is the messenger. They use the kid, instead of calling the other parent themselves and actually having a conversation, the kid gets used as the telephone, the messenger. You tell your dad this. Well, you go back and tell your mom that. So the kid becomes the relay station between the parents. The kid's getting used basically as a pawn between 2 sides. But there is absolutely one mistake that is by far the most damaging, that has nothing to do with necessarily pitting the kid in some kind of plan or plot or using them as a messenger. And we call this the big one, I guess. I don't know what else to call it. But it's the worst thing that a parent can do. The problem is it feels really seductive and it's easy for the parent to do. What's the worst thing that a parent can do? You get a divorce, your kid is with you. Let's say, I'm not projecting anything, but 10 years from now you get married, you have a 4-year-old kid, and your husband is off somewhere, and he did something terrible. He had an affair. Well, you're pissed at him. What's the worst thing you can do in front of your kid? No ideas? Yes?
Maybe like trash talk to that.
That's exactly what it is. Talking negatively about the other parent to your child is emotionally the worst thing you can do. I get it. He may be an asshole. She might be a jerk. She might have done terrible things. He might have done terrible things. But no matter what your emotions are towards that person is forever that child's father or that child's mother. And they love that person. And they need that person in their life. But this happens all the time. And it's so easy for that parent because it works both ways. The parent, right? You're on my team. Are you on my side? Or I hate this person, so you need to be on my team. So to the parent, it's very easy to do this. And for the kid, they like being on that parent side as well. So it's interactional. It goes both ways. And, temporarily, I guess the other thing is, it might even work, I guess, temporarily, in the short term. Like maybe that kid's tiny, they also start hating the dad because you've told them all these nasty things that he's done. Unfortunately, though, that kid is going to grow up. That kid's going to become a teenager. That kid's going to become an adult. And that kid's going to start to get some perspective on what happened to them in this situation. And what typically happens, if consistently, now if you do it every once in a while, I get it. You're a human being. It's not like you're planning some kind of bomb that's going to go off 20 years later. But if this is a consistent pattern, and there's plenty of relationships where this happens, the most common outcome is something we call mutual withdrawal. And that's what the M and the W stands for. Mutual withdrawal, well, essentially, the parent's behavior has backfired on them completely. Because if parents consistently talk bad about the other parent, when that kid is an adult, they want nothing to do with either parent. And they have literally no genuinely emotional relationship with their parents as adults. And we call that mutual withdrawal. So the very thing the parent was doing to try to, quote, get them on their side ends up destroying their relationship for the rest of their life. So there's millions of adult kids of divorce walking around this country who have no relationship at all with their biological parents, and they have no interest in starting one because they went through a process like this and mutual withdrawal happened. Before we're done, though, this was actually done. People always ask, what's a good school to go to? Florida State has Ohio State has a fantastic MFT program. But if you like the South and warmer weather, Florida State also has a great program. They put this together. They actually interviewed adult children of divorce and just got some advice. Let's see what we can glean from these adult kids.
You want them to see a healthy relationship. It'll really make the world of a difference.
Big events such as graduations, weddings, birthdays, make sure that your kids don't feel the strain of your divorce. Make them feel comfortable, make them feel loved, make that day about them.
Don't use your child as leverage against the other parent. I think that sets a bad example for the kids that they'll form an opinion about a parent that might not necessarily be true.
Make sure that I know that it's not my fault. The problems between you and your ex aren't on me, and I don't put the blame on myself.
Don't be upset if I enjoy spending certain holidays with my mother more than with you. You don't have to compensate for it just because you don't understand my tastes and interests the way that she does.
Don't jump into new relationships right away. If you get remarried, make sure that this is the one. My parents got divorced when I was really young, and the second divorce hurt me a lot more than the first one.
I think one of the most important things is to just respect each other. If you respect each other, it's easier to respect other people that are around you. And the fact that my parents respected each other a lot really had a huge effect on our relationship.
Don't talk negatively about your ex in front of your children. You want to make sure that your children are still able to form their own opinions because it's still their parent.
Working through your differences so you only need to have one party instead of having two separate birthday parties.
Be civil around your children. One Thanksgiving, my parents both had it together after they were divorced. It was probably one of the best Thanksgiving we had together.
Don't talk bad to each other in front of me. It makes things more difficult if I have to have mom versus dad and choose sides and who's right or wrong. Just makes everybody unhappy, and I'd really rather not have a competition. Both love me equally, just show it.
When you find someone new in your life, don't make it obvious that you're more important than us.
My parents never lied to me when I asked them questions about their divorce, and thanks to that, I never had any misconceptions that they were going to get back together, but I also knew that they both still cared about each other. Their honesty helped me deal with the process.
To keep your problems away from your children. If you're having a fight, I don't want to know any part of it. Just keep it away from your children and be fine.
Reassure the kids that it's not their fault.
So just make sure to, keep the love in your family. That's all kids want, really, is love from their parents.
Don't get mad at me if I don't like the person you're dating right away. It's a weird situation, and I need some time to get used to it and to get used to this new person in your life.
Don't involve me in the money transactions between each of you.
Don't make an assumption about how I'm going to feel about your divorce. Let me figure it out and support me in my own way.
If you don't live with the child, make sure that you're making every effort you can to communicate and not give up, even if it's difficult dealing with the other parent.
Don't talk about the problems that you have with your ex in front of your children.
Don't let your kids lose hope in relationships just because yours didn't work out.
My mom and my dad don't speak directly to each other, so my mom would tell me to tell my dad something, or my sister and I were constantly being told to tell the other parent something, and that really put a strain on us being the middleman in the relationship.
When going through a divorce, don't ever argue in front of your children.
So put all your energy into co-parenting, no matter how difficult it may be. That's really important, and that was important to me to see my parents get along and just communicate. So if something was going on with me, if I was sick or not, it was important for my mother to communicate that with my father.
My parents never made me feel guilty about going to see the other. It was always an easy transition to go from one house to the other, and both homes felt like home.
So, really good advice, obviously, and it touched on pretty much everything that we just talked about. You heard that the messenger idea come up a couple times, and at least 4 times they talked about not talking bad about the other parent. So these are things that naturally, and it's not like these people were like primed, here, say this. This is just things that naturally, this is what the kids remember. Their parents doing this to them, et cetera, et cetera. So a couple more things to write down on this, then we'll move on to remarriage and blended families. First thing to write down is not up here. I mean, it's connected to that 80%. So the good news is most kids do turn out okay. This should come as no shock. How well the kids do psychologically is directly correlated with how well the 2 divorced parents maintain their relationship. Do they still communicate? Do they lack hostility? Are they mature adults that put their issues aside when they're with the kids? So how the adults handle it is going to, it's so easy to predict. And that's the conversation we have with adults is, look, you have 2 choices. Handle this well and your kids are going to be fine. No problems. It's not going to be easy, but your kids are going to turn out fine. Handle this poorly, they're not going to turn out fine. And the worse you handle this is the worse they're going to turn out. Because we do see a phenomena that's known as the intergenerational transmission of divorce. That's what the ITOD stands for. I knew you've been waiting on pins and needles. What is it? The intergenerational transmission of divorce. This is exactly what it sounds like. I tossed the word genograms out in the first week. I know we haven't gotten into that yet. It's a couple weeks away, but when a therapist looks at a genogram, one thing that sticks out really easily is you see divorce runs in families. It absolutely does. It turns out lack of divorce also runs in families, so that's a good thing. So why? What explains? There's 2 really big reasons. It has nothing to do with these, by the way. Sorry. I didn't mean to indent those. So why do we see? We do see, on average, higher rates of divorce among kids whose parents got divorced. What explains this phenomenon? I mean, is it genetic? Is there a divorce gene? Maybe they cohabitated. So, you think it's still a good idea, and everyone's doing it, right? Well, here are the facts. Sorry, it's ingrained in my brain. I sleep at night, I see her face. So intergenerational trends, what helps explain this? Because I just told you most of them turn out just fine. But it still doesn't mean they're not at greater risk. No one wants to tell me? It's okay, I'll tell you. That's my job. Well, the first is, well, let me actually back up. Let's say no one in your family's ever gotten divorced. You have uncles, you have brothers, you have sisters. Divorce has never happened. Let's say you're having some problems in your marriage. How realistic or easy would it be for you to be the very first person in the Miller family to get a divorce? not very good, right? I mean, you feel like, holy cow. And what this would also say is I'm betting that if there's no divorce, there's a tradition of pretty good relationships and good communication, and you've probably got help. And grandparents and uncles are saying, let's work on this. What can we do to help you guys? Which helps keep these relationships alive, right? No one would ever want to be the first kid in their family to get a divorce. It would be like the mark of shame, like, oh, great, Emily couldn't figure it out. You don't want to be that guy. But how, and again, it's never easy, but how easy would it be to get a divorce if you look up in your family tree and everyone's gotten one? Some have had 2, 3 divorces, right? It's almost like a family tradition. So I wrote the one there. I guess I'll write something down. I know it sounds weird to say, but in some families, it's a family tradition. We're not saying it's easy, it's just common. And if it's common in a family, it makes it that much easier for the person to go through with it. And second, these are just pretty practical reasons. We do see higher rates. Again, 80% are okay, but 20% is a lot of people. We do see higher rates of very common psychological issues like depression and anxiety. But the main one, and we will talk about this down the road much more clearly when we get to the right theory. It's not that having depression makes you more prone to divorce or having anxiety. What the depression and anxiety about all boil down to insecurity in close, intimate relationships. So, not handled well in a child, it can change something. Does anyone know what's the word we're talking about here? Some of you know because you've taken like 8 of my classes. What it does is plant this word in your head. And when we get to it in about 6 weeks, like, aha, it messes with a child's sense of attachment. And that's what's at the core of a lot of relationship problems of children of divorce. At this point, all you need to know about this, if you've never heard this word before, that's perfectly fine. Attachment is just how you perceive close, intimate, meaningful relationships. How you act in them, what you expect from them. And a lot of times, again, in poorly handled situations, it screws up that sense of what it's like. I remember being a kid and thinking like, and I remember, well, first of all, I didn't really take what Mrs. Huddle told me seriously. So I didn't take it to heart. I didn't believe it. But I do remember having thoughts of, especially as a young adult, like, how do we even know what it is to be married? Because I don't have any experience like of an older generation being in like a solid, what I would call quality relationship. Like, is there a blueprint? Like, is there some kind of book I would need to be reading? But turns out you figure it out as you go along. So it causes, even in people who are well-adjusted, insecurity. So last but not least, this is the last thing, we'll get off the kids' divorce. Ages. And it's connected to this better off. And then we'll move on. Let's say I have a couple of you wanted 3 kids. Let's say you have 3 kids. And unfortunately, things are not working out. And one of your kids is 19 years old. Maybe they're not a boomerang yet. Maybe they're trying to move out. So you have a 19-year-old, you have an 11-year-old, and you've got a 5-year-old. You really spread things out. You've got 3 kids. As a therapist, who am I most worried about when this divorce happens? The 5-year-old, the 11-year-old, or the 19-year-old? So kids of divorce, who? You're going to say something.
The 11-year-old.
Why would you say that?
I feel like they're more impressionable. Like the one that's older wouldn't care so much just because they like are older and like mature more.
They can get it.
And then the younger one doesn't really know what's going on very much.
Okay. Any other guesses? So we have 1 vote for the 11-year-old. I like your thinking. I always like to hear the why. Just a, 5. Okay. No reason. It's actually the 19-year-old. Because they care so much. It's not that it's not going to be difficult for all of them, because it is. But the older a child gets, generally speaking, the harsher the psychological impact is on that individual, even if they're adults. Like some of the worst, not outcomes, but some of the harshest impacts of divorce have been people I've talked to who are 21, 22. They're in college, and their parents left, or their parents split up. There's many reasons why, and this isn't a class on divorce, so I'm just trying to hit highlights today. But when we talk to these kids, they might be one like this really intuitively. A lot of people, this doesn't make sense. They want to say the 5-year-old because they're so tiny and precious, or the 11-year-old because they're in the middle and they're right. They're almost at puberty. They're at their age where they're understanding things, or maybe not understanding things, but they get it. Then we got the adult. Come on, you're an adult. Can't you just deal with it? You're out of the house. When we talk to these kids, what is it? What's going on that's really causing a lot of, that's making it so hard for them? Yeah.
Maybe they're like not used to the change, like because that's like all they've ever known.
Okay, well, there's 2 reasons, and she just nailed the first one. First of all, they've got a longer history with this family, right? All of their memories, all of their childhood memories are with this mom and this dad. Every single one. And now that's been blown up. So they have a longer shared history. What's harder to lose? The pet that you've had for 2 years, or the pet that you've had for 19? I'm not saying losing a pet is ever easy. It's always hard. So that's why I use that example. It's always tough. So like, come on, well, who cares about the dog I've had for 2 years? Of course you do. It's horrible. But what about that one you've had your entire life? Now it's gone. It's harder. But what's the other, more insidious? What do parents tell these kids? And they're not lying. Why did they stay together? For you. We stayed together for you. We stayed together. What? What are you communicating to your kid? Because they're not lying either. They did. They stayed together for you. But what is the parent communicating to the adult kid when they say that? We'll get into this idea of a lot of times when a person talks to another person, they're saying one thing, but the meaning that comes across is entirely, there's a hidden second message that's covert, and a lot of people don't hear it. Yeah.
Saying they're like unhappy because of that.
Yeah, they're literally saying it's your fault.
Yeah.
That's the message that gets understood by the adult child is, well, gee, thanks. So I'm the reason you've been so miserable for 18, 19 years. So it's the guilt of being told we stayed together for you. Which is why this might sound counterintuitive to you. A lot of times the work of a marriage and family therapist isn't to, quote, we're not marriage savers. That's not what marriage and family therapists are. Sometimes divorce is the absolute best thing 2 people can do for the sake of their kids, which might seem counterintuitive to you. But there are some relationships where it is so toxic. And it doesn't always mean like fighting, like all the like yelling. Sometimes the coldness of unemotional relationships can be just as damaging. So bad, toxic families can go in both directions. You can have some that are really loud and obvious, but sometimes the ones that are silent and unemotional are just as damaging. And sometimes if you can't work it out, it's actually better to split up and work that part out than to stay, because this is what's living. But the good news, 80% just fine. So that's the message. Most families do find a way to work it out. Okay, moving on. I never understood watching the Brady Bunch as a kid, like how progressive that show really was. the fact that you had a husband from we never really found out. Whatever happened to the other parents? We ever know? Did they like die in a car accident or something? Or was it a divorce? It's weird how they dodged that. They had like 7 seasons and they never like talked about what happened to the other parent. I have no idea where they're at. But anyway, let's talk a little bit about remarriage. And this is where my family once again becomes a walking statistic ripped out of the pages of human development. So first, just some basic trends. And I guess I'll go in order. I was going to go out, but you probably don't appreciate that too much. In terms of marital, remember kids? We talked about marital satisfaction and marital stability. Well, in terms of remarriage, how do we compare to first marriages? Satisfaction, no idea. It's okay. So satisfaction is actually typically exactly the same. We really don't see much difference in the satisfaction of remarriages compared to first marriages. Although you do know, what are we going to practice in our second marriages? Not origami, heterogamy. Right, so we're probably going to cheat that homogamous 5 classification system somehow. Satisfaction looks the same. Stability, however, it's a little worse. The divorce rate for second marriages is significantly worse than first marriage. And when we talk to people who have gone through, in fact, some people get the label of a serial marrier, right? The person who's been married 3, 4. But when we talk to people who have gone through multiple divorces, it's actually very practical. It's easier the second time. They've already been through it. The first divorce was frightening as hell because they had no idea what was going to happen. But if you've already been divorced, the second one, all right, well, it didn't work out. Third one, even easier. Fourth one, what? I got divorced? I was married. So as you go, it just subsequently gets easier. Now here's where my parents fall on the line. Who gets remarried and when? Again, if we're talking about our traditional, stereotypical heterosexual marriages, who gets married and when? Any ideas? Who gets remarried more often? Or maybe it's the same. The husband or the wife? Any guess? Oh, yes. The husband. Husbands get married much more frequently than wives do. 90%, here's your numbers. It's not up there. 90% of husbands end up getting remarried. And they end up doing it relatively quickly. They end up getting remarried within the first 2 years after a divorce. For women, the numbers are a little different. Now, most do get remarried. 75% of women end up getting remarried as well. That's a pretty significant gap. And that's even if we go out 10, 12 years. So it takes women a lot longer to get remarried. Most do, but it takes on average of 5 to 10 years to reach that 75%, and then we kind of plateau. So men get married in greater numbers, and they get married quicker. Most women still get remarried, but it takes longer. And not as many end up. So more women end up not getting remarried at all than men do. And here's where my family fits perfectly in line. My dad got remarried within, I think, a year and a half. Mom never remarried. Why? And again, the explanation also is, like I said, I think they went to the library, they rented the book, and someone told them this is what you're supposed to do. Did my dad remarry someone he had on the side? Like, no, I'm not going to get the no, absolutely not. There was no affair. There was nothing like that, nothing that dramatic. It's not a TV show, it's real life. Who did my dad get remarried to? I mean, you don't know her. Of course you don't. Like, oh yeah, really? From Mount Union? No, it has nothing to do with Mount Union. Just in his life, who did my dad end up getting married to? Pieces of the puzzle are all in front of you. They might be on the previous page. My dad went to go get a haircut, and he walked into a salon. It was called Cookie's Sheer Magic in Little Weston, Ohio. And a woman named Cookie, who he went to high school with her. And he knew he knew that she lived in the town, and his mom lived in that town, and he was staying with his mom. He walked into Cookie's Sheer Magic to get a haircut, and Cookie started cutting his hair. And guess what my dad started doing? Ever get your hair cut? Beauty salons, maybe the ones you go to are very cold and unemotional, but the ones I go to, people talk. Barbershops, people talk. They talk about stuff. They talk about their life. They talk about things. Maybe you should get to know a different hairstylist. That's one of the beauties of getting your haircut. That's exactly what happened. He started talking to Cookie about life, about his remarriage, about his divorce, about his kids, and she started talking back to him. He ended up marrying this woman. Like about a year and a half later, what did we just talk about with the social support system of guys? It's eradicated. The person guys typically end up getting married to is the person that they end up talking to. Whoever becomes their new emotional support system fills in those gaps, and that's the person the guy typically remarries. When people hear this number, 90% within 2 years, the first thing that, oh yeah, he had someone, I know, right? Or it wouldn't have happened that quick. No, the reason it happens that quick is for survival, psychological survival. Turns out we're not wired to live alone and isolated. Men need a social support system just like women do. And they end up getting remarried to the person who fills in that blank. And then we've also explained the women. There's 2 reasons why the women don't get married in such great numbers, and also why it takes so damn long. Well, first, right, they've got backups. They don't necessarily need this support system. They have others. They might prefer another husband or another partner, but they don't necessarily need it as much as the man does. But what else is, I guess, interrupting maybe a wife's or a former wife's desire to get remarried? Probably the biggest, yeah.
You don't want to go through the same bad relationship again.
It's a good. You're not wrong. I'm sure there is. It's not the one we're shooting for. I always wonder about that too. Like, I can't even imagine. Like, I wouldn't even know what to do. Can you help me with the Tinder? Anyway, no idea what's out there, and I don't want to know. Kids. The biggest reason is the kids. How easy is it to go dating when you have the kids? You've already seen, right, what it's like to have kids. Now picture yourself alone. You have no idea. You want to leave the house? Oh, you're not leaving the house. You're never leaving the house. And now you're on your own. Good luck. Good luck dating. Is it possible? Of course it is. It all depends on what kind of help you have, but it makes it that much more difficult. But people do get remarried. It does happen. And when my dad got remarried, I'm surrounded by women. I've never had a brother. And I remember I did have a thought. I was trying to find the bright side of things. And I remember thinking, well, maybe one of my parents will get remarried. I always wanted a brother. I always just wanted I had 2 older sisters. My dad gets remarried. What does she have? 3 freaking daughters. Thanks, Dad. So now I have 2 sisters and I have 3 stepsisters. Great. The females around me just expanded. Well, people do get remarried, but there's different types of remarriages. And it turns out, in terms of satisfaction and stability, these remarriages are different. So the most basic type of remarriage is what we call a single remarriage. And all this means is that for one of the partners, it's a first marriage. Guy meets girl, guy gets married, guy gets divorced, guy goes into a hair salon and marries a woman who never got married before. Well, that would be a single, so we have no kids. Single remarriage is just 2 adults, one of which has never been married before. This is like the golden nugget of remarriages because this has the same level of marital stability as first marriages. There's no difference. what do I call it, the golden nugget? That doesn't make any sense, but you know what I mean. It looks, in other words, in terms of satisfaction and stability, there's nothing even remotely interesting about this couple. Their divorce rate is probably 19%, 25 because they're older. So that couple's very likely to stay together, just like your roommates who get married when they're 26. Congratulations. But things start to get more interesting as we make the family more interesting. Then we have double remarriage. What a double remarriage is probably what you can guess. Both people, for both parties, it's not a first marriage. And this is where we start to see stability go down by about 5 to 10%. And then we make things even more interesting. We have a double remarriage with kids. It's like ordering from a menu. What would you like? Like a double remarriage? What do you want? Double marriage with kids? A double remarriage with kids comes in two types. One is when kids come from just one party. But then it gets even more interesting when there's children from both parties. And that's what our family had. Of course, my dad had his own children. Stepmom had her own children. So it was like two armies clashing together. And that's what we call a blended family. It's not up there. The words aren't up there. And blended families certainly come with their challenges. There's been a couple studies done. You can't make this stuff up. With each kid that's added to the blended family, the divorce rate gets higher and exponentially higher. The more kids you add, the higher the divorce rate. So statistically speaking, the Brady Bunch was a freaking miracle. Because the divorce rate for a blended family with 3 children coming in from both sides is astronomically high. It's just like your 18 to 20-year-olds who get married for the first time. But this is interesting. I found this a couple days ago. I was looking at some stuff, maybe to show you. I wasn't actually looking for this. I'm usually looking for stuff from the children's point of view, but I ended up stumbling upon this. It's parents talking to step-parents, which I found fascinating. So it's, imagine, I mean, they had conversations, but imagine my mom talking to my stepmom. That's what this is. And I started watching it, and like, this is really cool, because I was looking for kids, what they're dealing with, and I ended up finding the adults, which makes the conversation a little bit different.
So Tara and I were married for 7 years, and 2 years into it, we had an antibody.
You know, we had a few good years. I just think that at some point, you know, we stopped watering the plant.
And you know, with anything, a plant, if you put poison on it, it'll just wilt and die.
My parents have been together for 45 years. Divorce was never an option for me.
So these were painful times, hard.
It's an awful feeling to not be with your child every day of their life.
At some point, she started seeing somebody after we were done.
Yeah, at the time of the divorce, I didn't consider Jamie finding another wife.
That triggered a lot of emotions. So it was going to be around my son.
The idea of Jason being a co-parent was the easiest thing. I mean, he's completely born to be a father.
So for me, as Nak's stepdad, when I introduce him, I never call him my stepson. Like, this is my son. And I let Nak know immediately when I married his mom, like, you're my son, you're my blood.
He fully embraces him, goes to his basketball games, goes through his homework, gets. I saw him cry once when my son wasn't telling the truth about something. I saw Jason like be hurt, like he's invested in him.
Like, we play around a lot, but a lot of it at this stage, especially being 12 and 13, is like how you move through this world. as a man.
Jason has this way about him that's very something I don't have, which is like structure.
By the grace of God, I was blessed with a new husband, and Jamie was blessed with a new wife. I don't care who these other people are with my kid, it's just not me. So I love Jamie and I love Natasha, but it's not me. And so that's my struggle. Like that's where I fall apart all the time. Nach's relationship with Natasha is great. He just has a huge heart and kind of accepts a lot of people into his world, and she makes it really easy.
Music is a big part of this family. It just keeps it really fun and light and loving too, you know. And I think that's a big way of how Nak and I have bonded, being kind of like a new friend in his life as well as a new parent in his life, but still keeping it loving and fun.
One of the things I'm going to do today is I wrote Jason a letter, which opened up a lot of stuff about how I feel about him as a man and as a father to Nak, a co-parent.
I haven't had the opportunity to really sit with Natasha and thank her for all the incredible work that she does with my son. She needs to hear it and she needs to know.
It's been a long day. A long day.
So I wrote a letter to you. I'm gonna read it.
Are you supposed to be someone I hate? Are you supposed to be someone that challenges my own manhood?
This new woman in my life, a new pair of arms that my son would be cuddled in. I knew I was not being replaced, but you were only adding more love into Mac's life.
You're a man of integrity, a man of skill, a beautiful husband.
You are so kind, tender-hearted woman who I could clearly see loves Mac from her core.
I admire you, and I'm grateful for you.
There's the saying about happy wife, happy life. But I also believe that your love for Jamie makes him a better dad for Mac. He's so lucky to have you.
I know how powerful it is for a boy to see that his mother is loved, because that's how he's going to treat his wife. And you're doing that for him. You're doing the things I couldn't do. And I love you for that, man. I'm supposed to not love you for that, but I do.
And thank you for being who you are and for loving my boy. You are truly already a wonderful mother, and our journey has only begun. Love you too.
This lovely surprise. So sweet. Thank you.
Thank you, my man. I just want you to have that. You ain't got to say nothing, man. Just want you to feel my love. Thank you.
Mac has always wanted a big family, one with lots of brothers and sisters. And now look what has happened for him.
Full pancake, subscribe.
Kind of a fun ending there, but anyway, I just thought that was pretty incredible. I mean, if there's a right way to do it, that's how to do it. Of course, it doesn't always end up that way, but it was fun to show you, I guess, the good way it turns out, because we're always talking about the bad ways that it turns out. And in therapy, a lot of what you do is you use people's strengths and you help them get to that point. So, but a couple things to write down about step families, and then we'll move on to something completely different. Why is it so hard? I mean, we could probably talk for a long time about the ins and outs, the little idiosyncrasies that make it difficult. But there's a few reasons why being a blended family is so difficult and why the divorce rates are high, why these families don't always work out like this. And the first is a term that's not in, I don't think it's in your book. If it is, it's definitely not in the beginning. Blended families are something that we call an incomplete institution. Does anyone have any idea what that means? Well, good. It's fun to learn new things. So none of you are married, right? No? Is anyone engaged? I'm asking very personal questions. It's fine. All right, so no one's engaged, no one's married. How does, in this country, what does that process look like? How does a couple typically go from not being, let's say, a dating couple? What does the process of getting married look like, step by step? What do couples do? Like, what might happen to you? Yeah.
I mean, date for a while first.
Okay, so you date for a while first. How long?
Like 5.
Maybe 5-ish years. Okay, so we have a dating period. Then what happens? And I'm asking very easy. I'm not trying to be hard here at all. Like very, yeah.
There's a proposal.
There's a proposal. Who usually proposes? The man. In some usually fun way, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so the man proposes. Anything he's supposed to do before he proposes to you?
Yeah.
Oh, he's supposed to ask parents or ask for permission? I remember doing that. That was fun. It was over breakfast. They knew what I was. Why else would I just pop over? Like, can I talk to you guys? Like, anyway, that was cool. So the guy's supposed to ask for permission. He's supposed to then what? So now he's asked. So now you're engaged. Now what happens? I learned a couple things actually. That's really annoying, but I think it's the top machine guy. I shouldn't give him a hard time. He's just doing his job. Any ideas? Go ahead. You plan a wedding. Hey, is there a bachelorette party? Maybe a bachelor party. I learned something new. There's also something called an engagement party. I didn't know that was a thing until we were engaged. Like, okay, more stuff. Like, whatever. So there's an engagement. So you guys, so none of you are married, right? How the hell do you know this? You've never been through it. Well, so marriage, the process of getting engaged in marriage, this is why I'm making this point. It's an institution. In this country, getting married, what that means is, this is what you could write down. An institution simply means there's a social script. Even if you've never done it, you can probably tell me the 18, 19 different steps in doing it. Because society has decided, well, this is how you do it. It doesn't mean it's how you have to do it. I'm not saying that at all. But getting married in this country is an institution. You could even tell me details about a wedding if you've never been to one. What's supposed to happen? Play this song. Then the wife comes in. People stand up. People sit down. It's an institution. Blended families? No. Even in 2021, there is no social script for how to be a step-parent. Every kid's different. Every marriage is different. Every family is different. If you talk to step-parents and you ask them, the successful ones, now there's things that they do, right? They talk to each other, of course. But for what I mean in general, they're kind of winging it. They don't really know. No one's told them what to do. There's plenty of books to buy, but probably all 18 books that you buy will tell you 18 different things. So it's an incomplete institution, and we'll get a little more technical. We'll just do 2, just so we can move on. From the parent's point of view, one of the biggest questions is, what role do I play? Am I his mom? Is that okay to say? Well, for some kids it might be. For some kids it's not going to be at all. Then what about the other parent? What role? If you are a new step-parent, who are you exactly? When you're a parent, you don't think of the minutiae of events you've been through with this child. You were there in the beginning. You changed the diapers. You're this kid's parent. They look up to you. You can tell them to jump through fire and they'll do it for you. You just met this 12-year-old a year ago and you've only really had 5 meaningful conversations. what does that mean? So the role is completely ambiguous. Step parents are scared to death of the children a lot of the time. If they're honest, they have no idea. And the third, it's kind of the same, just the inverse. From the kid's point of view, who is this person? And how do I treat them? Kids have very practical fears and anxieties. And I would just call this, who are you? From the kid's point of view, who is this new step parent? I remember the day stepmom and I figured this out. So the name of the hair salon was Cookie Sheer Magic. Well, that's because her name was Cookie. That wasn't her real name, though. It was like the name of the child, Cookie. That's ridiculous. It was her nickname. She got it. Her dad used to call her Cookie all the time as a kid, and it just stuck. And her real name was Esther, and she didn't really like her real name, I guess. So she went by Cookie. And when she opened up her hair salon, it was like an homage to her dad. She called it Cookie Sheer Magic, and everyone in the town called her Cookie. Cookie. As a kid, I'm like 9, 10 years old. I didn't know what to call her at all, and I distinctly remember being in the kitchen of their house, and the typical thing I would do, for some reason I had a hard time calling someone Cookie. I couldn't, hey, Cookie, that just felt weird. And plus you're like a stepmom, and I'm sure as hell not gonna say, hey mom, because you're not my mom, and saying, hey stepmom, that sounds weird. Like, it was just the things you worry about as a stepkid are bizarre. Like, what kid spends time worrying about what to call an adult in their life? But when you're a stepkid, you spend hours worrying about this stuff. So I would always go over there and be like, hey, you, like the awkward, like, I don't know what to call you type of thing. And she was picking up on this. She's not an idiot. And finally she had picked up and she had sat down. She's like, Kevin, I get it. She's like, what do you want to call me? And I'm like, and I didn't know that she knew that I was worrying about this. I thought I was hiding it in the most worst way possible. And she just sat down with me. She's like, you don't want to call me mom, do you? Like, I'm like, no. She's like, because I'm not your mom. And she's like, do you want to call me stepmom? And I'm like, not really. And she's like, and then you could see the light bulb went off. She's like, oh, I get. So it feels weird calling someone Cookie, doesn't it? I'm like, yeah, it sure does. And she's like, just say it with me. I'm like, what? It's like Cookie. And they're like, Cookie. She's like, say it again. And I started laughing, and we would laugh for 10 minutes. But the funny thing was, after that, I called her Cookie. I had no problem. She's like, just call me Cookie. That's what she wanted to be called. And instantly, the anxiety was gone. It was like it left and it never came back. And for the rest of her life, I called her Cookie. So again, but it took that weird. She didn't read that in the book. She winged it. And if we weren't in the right place at the right time, I might have worried about that for 6 more months, right? So this is what we mean when it's an incomplete institution, and step parents and the kids are literally just making it up as they go along, and you pray to God it works out. So that's it. Any questions over that? Through marriage? Step kids. All right, we've been through a lot in this. This actually officially closes out the. Oh no, it doesn't. There was one more slide. The boomerang generation. I forgot. There's 2 new kinds of families. Sorry. Back it up. Not like you were leaving. We still got 20 minutes. Wow, he was serious. There's 2 new kinds of families out there that family therapists are working with. One, you didn't watch a documentary of, and we're not going to watch a documentary on it because it would just take too much time. One new kind of family that therapists are creeping into the room, I've definitely dealt with this, is the sandwich generation. So we love giving people labels in psychology. We put you in a box. We can talk about you. Oh yes, you're in the sandwich generation. I know 3 things about you and 5 things that are wrong with you. I am not part of the sandwich generation, although people my age, this is what we're talking about. So you guys are the boomerang generation. Us 40-year-olds are the sandwich generation. What are a lot of my peers? And it's weird. I now have 3 friends that I knew growing up who are dealing with this. They're in it. What does that mean? Yeah,
They take care of their one, yeah.
exactly. So they're taking care of their own kids. So that's part of this. I guess that's one bun. You're the meat. The other flip side of it, though, is they're also taking care of their older parents who need assistance. So we're not talking about fun grandma who lives in the house and goes to Vegas every week. Hey, we love living with grandma. No, this is an older adult who needs some kind of care. Maybe it's an adult with Alzheimer's. So on one hand, you're taking care of your mom who has dementia. The rest of the day, you're taking care of your 8-year-old who needs to go to 3rd grade. That's what we call the sandwich generation. It's a relatively new phenomenon. It's only been going on for about 5 to 10 years, but about 20 to 25% of people my age are doing this, and it's killing them psychologically. Caregiver's burden is the biggest issue that comes up with this. We're not going to unpack this too much. I mean, if you are interested in this, it's a interesting thing to learn about and study. In classes like adulthood and aging, we talk about it. Abnormal psych a little bit. The caregiver's burden is just the term. It's actually a diagnosis. It's the term that we use for someone who's a caregiver being burnt to their end. They can't take it anymore. High rates of depression, anxiety, suicide, substance abuse, increased aging, and I'm not making that up. Caregiver's burden. It's hard enough taking care of an older adult. It's even harder when you're also taking care of your own kids at the same time. So that's the type of family that might come in your office that MFT 30 years ago never saw. And the other type, of course, is what you guys talked about and watched about last week, and that's the boomerang generation. And I don't need to define that, so you already know what that is, but I do have some interesting tidbits for you, because a lot of you talked about it. Some of you wouldn't seem to mind it. Some of you definitely would mind being a boomerang. Some of you have seen it. Some of you have not. So here's what we know about these boomerangs. And if they walk into your office, we know where the problems lie. So the boomerangs, the good news is it's 50, 25, 25. What is that? Adds up to 100. So we must be talking about percentages, and we are. The good news is when a boomerang goes home. So let's say you end up, about 4 years from now, you end up right back in your bedroom. The pool table has to get moved out. We'll put the paint back up. There's your picture. The good news is for 50% of those families, the quality of the relationship between the kids and the parents remains the same. In other words, when we ask them, hey, how's your satisfaction with your relationship with your kid? 50% of the families say there's no difference whatsoever. That's good. So what we're saying is it hasn't been a bad thing. And I think you saw that in the documentary that you watched. They're dealing with things, but not necessarily bad. For 25%, they actually see an improvement. This is really good news. Kid moves back in. Of course, stereotypically, we think it's going to be horrible. But I think psychology always presents things that way. You've already gotten some great news. For 75% of the families, the relationship's either just fine or it's actually gotten better. But, and you saw a couple examples of this, 25% of the families, things get worse. And it can get really bad. And we know exactly what they argue about, and we know exactly what the remedy is. So if you're a therapist and they come in, you get a call, hey, I can't stand my adult son. What the hell do I do with him? Come in. There's 3 major things these families are arguing about. And a couple of you mentioned this in your discussions. You kind of guessed it, even if you're not a boomerang. The first is simply the rules. And what we mean by this is, what are the rules of the house, and do you have to follow them? You're 25 years old. Can I come and go? Is it my apartment? I don't know. I remember college. You just do your own thing. It doesn't matter. You can literally, if you're hungry at 3:30 in the morning, you can literally get out, leave the house, and eat at 3:30 in the morning. Well, now you're back home. What do the rules look like? So they argue about this. Where were you last night? Why isn't your business? Will you live under my roof? These conversations will creep right back up. The second is the rules. How are you treated, and how do you treat your parent? I'm going to give you a term. I think it's in the book somewhere. I'm not sure. But it might be a term you've never heard before. There is a type of maturity you will hopefully reach someday that we call filial maturity. Anyone know what this means? You've heard this before, maybe a family development class. Filial maturity is reached. So I guess you could think about that old question of when do you become an adult? And how do you know, right? What are the 21 ways you become an adult? Well, one way when people feel like an adult is when their parents start treating them different. And they start treating their parents differently. When you are, maybe you've already felt this. I'm not sure if you have, but has anyone noticed when you go home, your parents don't treat you like you were 16, 17, or 18? I hope so. I mean, you're right on that edge. So who knows? And we're all a little bit different. But there will, hopefully, there's supposed to become a time when your parents start treating you more like you're always going to be their child, but you're actually going to probably feel more like a peer. Like you're an adult now, right? It's almost like a teacher-student relationship. I have students now, I've been here 11 years, who are now therapists, and they don't call me Dr. Mott. Well, some do, but you can call me Kevin if you'd like. Right, you're freaking 35 years old. We can go out and have lunch. Filial maturity. It's when the relationship changes. The adult-child relationship changes. Well, this is what we're talking about with number 2. Sometimes filial maturity isn't reached. And we have a 25-year-old back in the house, and the parents are treating that 25-year-old like they're 17 and 18. But it's almost like it's naturally triggered because they moved back in, and the parents, maybe things were changing, but now you're back, and it's like the roles get screwed up. But one of the biggest ones is rent. Out of sheer curiosity, I don't know if you have a human development family science t-shirt. How did you get that? No kid. I've been staring at this the whole time. If you can't see her class, she's wearing a human development. That's my major. That's awesome. I didn't know we had t-shirts. I'm like, I didn't make those. Huh. Talk to your friend. Well, now we have t-shirts. So how many of you, just out of sheer curiosity, and be completely honest, so you're 25, you come back home, how many of you think it would be fair for your parents to say, well, you need to pay at least $250, $300 in rent per month to live here? And by the way, if you didn't know, I'm not sure how many of you do know, but if you're on your own, like what's an average decent apartment? And we're in Alliance. In Columbus, a decent apartment back in 2004 was at least $900 a month. And that's something that's livable. And I'm not talking like luxuries. So rent is not cheap in the real world, like in a real town, like when you have to get a real job. How many of you would say that's fair, to have to pay rent? Some of you are raising your hands. Maybe some of you are just being polite. When we actually ask adults, only about 50% of kids say it's fair. Like some do, some don't. When we ask parents, 90% of them say, oh, hell yes, they're paying rent. So this is a point of contention for a lot of the kids. The kids don't think it's fair. The parents are expecting it. But the number one thing, and that's why you can probably already guess it because I put it up there. The number one thing that these people have in common, the 50 and the 25 that are good or better, that the 25% who are worse don't, is a plan. And you saw this in the documentary. The common denominator to harmony is if the kid has an exit plan. Do you have a strategy for leaving the house? You're back. We get it. You can eat dinner here and we'll help you with your laundry. But the number one common denominator is simply having an exit strategy. Not like I'm working on finding a job. No, a very clearly defined. Remember that one family, I can't remember what they said, like when he turns 25, he's out of the house. Like the parent made a plan for them. Of course, the kid's like, oh, well, you didn't come up with a plan, so we're going to do it for you. And it's almost like magic. When these families come in the therapy room, if you can get them this is what they're arguing about. But a lot of times doing therapy is seeing through the noise and not getting attached to the details. You'll understand that more in a little while in this class. And if you can just get them to work out a plan, it's almost like those arguments become meaningless because everyone knows, oh, well, here's our, okay. It's like all that stuff just goes away. So that's the common denominator they have. So looking at the time, we talked about a lot: marriages, cohabitation, kids, divorces, remarriage, generations, all that stuff. So we'll close this out, and this is, well, we'll stop here today because we can start something else, but I'm not going to. We're going to close this out on a good note. So what do happy families have in common? We've spent a lot of time talking about problems and issues and trends. This is probably not a complete list. This isn't all of them. But when we go out in the world and we talk to families who are happy, who are doing well, what do we know about them? And by the way, this could be a list of things family therapists are secretly or covertly working on with the families they're working with. One thing families have is commitment. And what we mean by this is they commit time to spend together. It doesn't have to, there's no scripted way to do this. You don't have to have dinner together every night. It is whatever it is for you, as long as it's there. In other words, you can't go to your friend's house at 7 o'clock on Thursday because 7 o'clock on Thursday is when we all have dinner together. That's an example. So there's commitment. The second is the houses are filled with positive affect. What is this? That's a nice shirt. Thank you for wearing it. Caldwell. Do I see a Caldwell shirt? Very cool. They have a good cross-country program. I ran against Caldwell. They're the only school to beat us when I was in high school. Damn you, Caldwell.
Where'd you go?
Harrisville. You got to go back to the 90s, though. Brian Hessen, you probably know that. Anyway, what the hell? We just positive affect. So that's what that was. Psychologically building each other up. It doesn't have to be like epic. But in this house, if you're a fly on the wall, you hear example after example of positive affect. They give each other compliments. Go figure. Daughter walks down the stairs. Wow, you look cute today. Good job. Thanks, Daddy. Those little things. In other words, these relationships are comprised of positive affect. Instead of tearing each other down, these people actually build each other up on a daily basis. It's just part of who they are. A third is time. This is related to commitment. You can't have time without the commitment. So the commitment is the sense of purpose that I'm going to do. These families spend a significant amount of time together, and they've carved it out. I'm going to add something to this to make it very different than commitment. And that is something that I think families take for granted until maybe they're older, and that is traditions. So along with time goes family traditions. Family traditions are very important. From you guys, I mean, not you guys, but a previous MFT class, I learned about pickles and Christmas, and people hide a pickle in the Christmas tree or something. Did anyone ever do this? If you're saying yes, some of you are looking like I did 2 years ago. I had never heard of this. But anyway, it's a thing. Whatever your tradition is, awesome. Traditions are so important for kids and family. I mean, the parents too. It's time and traditions are the sort of the heartbeat to keep the family together. A fourth, this is obvious, communication skills. We'll get more into detail on this. Basically, what we mean by this, though, in a nutshell, people in this family feel like they can open up to each other. So if you made a list of people you would go to if you're dealing with something, your mom, your dad, whoever it is, your sister, would be on that list. A fifth It doesn't mean you actually have to agree. What we mean by shared values and beliefs, this is kind of a misnomer. People think that means you all have to believe the same thing. No. It means you respect each other for your beliefs. So by shared values and beliefs, we simply mean you respect one another. You have very different beliefs and values. My God, families are freaking patchwork. But you have respect for each other. The next one, we're almost done. What are you supposed to mean by this? Backstage. This is extraordinarily important. And it's really probably only obvious if you don't have it. Because then it starts to stick out. They use the term backstage. They're sort of making an analogy to the theater. I mean, when you're on the stage, you're playing a character, right? When you're backstage, you're just yourself. And that's what we mean by this. You can 100% be yourself in front of your family. In other words, when you're there, when you go home for Thanksgiving or whatever it is, you don't feel like you're putting on a facade. You feel whatever. That's how you're supposed to feel around your family. You can actually be yourself, whoever that is. And then last but not least, this will come up in the online lectures, and now I know what I'm going to talk about. Families who are healthy are involved. They are not isolated. That doesn't mean they're all on the school board and class presidents. But, they're involved in the community somehow. The kids are in activities. The parents go to those activities. They're part of some kind of club. Maybe it's a church, religion, whatever it is. That's an easy way to solve it for a lot of families. But you're somehow involved in the community. And you have a social network around you. And that's it. It's 11 o'clock. It's 11:01. I guess this is kind of a nice place to stop because that ends the family development stuff that's not in your book. And I'll tell you the stuff that will be talked about in the online lecture that I'm going to do is going to be from chapter 3. And then after that, once we go back to chapter 2, we'll talk about some therapy skills. And that's it.